Welcome to the Highland Heights Sunday morning Bible class series. We have been going through different individuals in the Old Testament. And if you're just joining us, we've been, I guess we've gone through 3 or 4 at this point. 3, thanks. Abraham, Job, and David. So if you're looking for where we are so far, that's where we've been. Tonight, we are continuing on in our series, looking at the questions that these individuals have asked and seeing how we as Christians today might still be asking some of the same questions. Maybe society around us is asking us the same questions. And what are the answers that God provides to us in Scripture? So tonight, we are looking at Solomon, the son of David, and looking at his writings as the teacher in the book of Ecclesiastes and some of the questions that he asked. He asked every question under the sun, and we will get to those. So Jeremy, kind of as we're setting this up, as we're setting up these questions we're going to talk about tonight, what are the point of his questions?
Very good. What are the point of his question? Because that is the point of his questions, is what's the point? It's interesting to note that Ecclesiastes is not directly attributed to Solomon. It's just the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, who had lots of wisdom and sat and mused about life. So sounds like Solomon to me, but there are those that make that argument, but sounds a lot like Solomon. And what he's doing is, the question he's dealing with here is not so much directed at God as about God or his absence. Okay. We're here. That's indisputable unless you want to get into really weird computer simulations and things like that. So, we're here. All right. Let's just take that as accepted. We're here. Okay. Why? What's the point? What are we trying to do here? All right. What makes life valuable? What makes the journey that we're on worth living? Okay. Where do we find that purpose, that meaning, that the existential question, what is the meaning of life, is kind of wrapped up in this. Okay. And so Ecclesiastes is Solomon's musings on that subject. Now he's going to set out to find earthly paths to that meaning. Okay. And so you see a recurring phrase in the book, under the sun. That's where Solomon is looking for his meaning, is under the sun. That is, in this world. Okay. And if you want someone who had the wherewithal to try various sources of meaning, Solomon ruled the largest kingdom of the day. He was incredibly wealthy. He was the wisest man of his era. Okay. People traveled from far and wide, the Queen of Sheba, because not just because they heard about his wealth and power, but because they heard about his wisdom. Okay. So he had the ability, he had the circumstances to try just about every earthly path under the sun to meaning, to give his life value, to make it worthwhile. And Ecclesiastes are his thoughts on the subject. And it in a sense, the book does take the form of kind of repeated musings. Okay. Like a lot of Hebrew writers, he'll talk about something and then talk about something else and then circle back. Okay. So very much maybe good for a Zoom era where you're constantly circling back to things. I don't know, but he's musing about it. He's thinking, okay, I've tried all this and here's what I found. And ultimately what he finds is, spoiler alert, there's no meaning under the sun. His path to meaning under the sun ultimately comes up empty.
Well, that's depressing,
right?
That's kind of the way Ecclesiastes is viewed for most of the book. Of course, we get to the end, we'll talk more about chapter 12 when he does have some positive light to bring on the purpose of faith and knowing God. And to me, that's one of the interesting things here. I think we as Christians might read this and say, "Oh, this is from Solomon's dark period, right?" There was the early years when he was asking for wisdom. Things were going well. He knew not to cut babies in half. But then he starts to fall off the wagon. He marries a bunch of foreigners, people who are, I apologize. He marries people who are of a different faith than him. That's the main point. And so because of that, we see this downward decline in the way we view Solomon. And God does him the blessing of not taking away the kingdom from him, but rather takes it away from his son. So, you know, when we see this, we should also remember that he still knows who God is. Even as he's writing these things, he's talking about the world beneath. He's talking about what's available to me now. But he knows who God is. He has not forgotten who God is. And because of that, I think it's actually relatable to us as Christians. Oftentimes, we don't forget who God is. We just neglect to put him first in our lives. Like, oh, yes, of course, I'll pray about that. But that certainly wasn't where my mind went first. Of course I want to serve God and I want to be a part of building up his kingdom, but there's a lot of other fun things. There's other priorities I have in my life, whether it's work or family or sports or school or whatever it is for an individual. We often say, yes, God's first, but it sure doesn't look like that from our actions. And so when I read the words of the teacher here, I think, that reminds me a lot of our modern day church. Now, if we wanted to go outside the church, we would see that chapter by chapter, if we wanted to, we could go through and say, oh, this looks a lot like this modern day group. This looks like a lot like this group over here who says that this is the highest end in life and what needs to be put first. And maybe they wouldn't say that out loud, but by their actions, once again, they sure do act as if this is the most important thing. And so in some ways, Solomon, the teacher, is trying all of these out for us so that we can use the life of one person who we believe to be wise to say, here's someone who tried it out. Here's someone who made the mistakes on our behalf so that we wouldn't have to make them. And in that way, as any good teacher would do, the teacher is trying to point us to the end of where we're trying to get to, rather than making us reinvent the wheel. So it does serve a good purpose in that way, showing us what the point of living for God is, because not only because it's good, but also showing us that there's absence in meaning from other places. So I do think that Solomon has a lot of relevance in our church today.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. I think there's a tendency sometimes to look at these things because, Solomon lived 2,900 years ago, and it doesn't read like something we would read today. And so we think, oh, well, that's back in the past.
It reads like a song from the 1970s.
Well, okay, exactly. Part of it does at any rate. But, the format is not what we're used to. And yet, human nature is what it is. I have a saying with my kids, it's grammatically incorrect. So if you're an English teacher watching this, I apologize, but it's grammatically incorrect on purpose. So work with me here. I tell them people is people. Okay. Human nature has not changed all that much. The forms might have changed, but human nature hasn't changed all that much. In fact, as Solomon says, there's nothing new under the sun. Okay. He'll bring that up multiple times in the book. I will tell my kids, the example I use is, what's the difference between a clay tablet from ancient Sumeria with cuneiform letters stamped into it and a modern computer? Well, technology, the amount you can store, ease of use, the fact that we can read what it's put out, not necessarily the language the computer works in, but what it outputs, we can read that. Things like that. But ultimately, a cuneiform tablet, a hieroglyphic wall in Egypt, a scroll from ancient Israel, a bound book from the Roman Empire, a computer, an ebook reader. The purpose of all of them is to store and convey information. So we've got new and up-to-date ways to try all the things that Solomon tries to find meaning. We've got new and up-to-date ways for all of these things to fail us in our search for meaning and value. We've got new and fun distractions to keep us from God, but ultimately it's all the same thing. And so when we read Solomon, we're reading someone who says, look, I tried it. This is what I found. There's no there. It's all, as he says in chapter 1 and verse 2, vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. See, And that word vanity is it's like a vapor. It's like a mist. It's like trying to grab on to a fog. I mean, it's not gonna work. It's empty. Okay. And that's what Solomon is saying is all the things that I've tried are the same things human beings have tried and will try. And it's all empty.
So look, okay. So looking at footnotes myself here, and I don't want to say that it's empty per se. It is. It's fleeting, right? So it was there. There was something there, and I think that we do the teacher Solomon. We do him a disservice to say that he tried something, right? It wasn't. He wasn't doing what the world would call stupid things, right? He
Right.
wasn't. He wasn't burning money. He wasn't just. He wasn't doing things that he didn't think would have a good ending for him. Like there was an idea, there was a theory that this would move along in the right direction, but he found out that you're right, that there's emptiness to it, but there was a semblance to the outside. There was a semi-permanence to it, but it quickly goes away. So we don't necessarily think that Solomon is being silly, that he's throwing aside his wisdom, his God-given wisdom, but rather that he's not connecting the dots to where he knows that they need to go. He's asking a lot of big questions, and trying out things, but at the same time doesn't seem to be willing to go to the source that we know that he knows is there. So.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like empty calories in a meal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's food and it'll fill your stomach, but it doesn't give any nutrition. And he actually leads with that, in the first part after the introduction, chapter 1, verses 2 through 11. Okay. He basically says that. He says, vanity of vanity, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Way to lead with the positive there, Solomon. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the north or south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. That kind of feels like the weather around here lately. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Boy, that's fun. And you look at what he says, we work and we toil, and tomorrow we get up and we work and we toil again. And it goes and it fades. Okay. And it's all a cycle. And whatever we do will go undone. The rivers flow into the sea, but the sea is never full and the river never disappears. There's nothing new. Like we said, there's only new methods. And you look at Solomon tried a lot of things that in our world today, we think this works too. He tries wisdom, but wisdom fades. The deeper you get into the mysteries of the universe, the more you realize you don't know. I will jokingly say sometimes that, I wish teenagers would hurry up and solve all the world's problems while they still know everything. Okay. And teenagers get a lot of grief for that. And some of it, most of it probably is not deserved because they lack, there's an experience gap here. As you grow, as you learn, you realize how much you don't know. And that wisdom fades. He tries self-indulgence, pleasure. He tries to get everything he wants. And yet, what does he find? The same thing we find. What's new will become old. You buy a new car, it's going to wind up in a junkyard. You buy a new phone, eventually it's going to sit and collect dust on your shelf because they've come out with a new one. Okay, if you buy a new iPhone, by the time you get that one paid off, they're going to be 3 or 4 generations past it. And it's, basically Siri's going to read your mind at that point is where we're going. But, it's the newness fades and you need a new. Later on in the book, he'll say that youth fades, but the wisdom of age is not all that great. The youth is great while you're young, and then you get wisdom and you discover how much that hurts. Like when you try to get out of bed in the morning, things like that. Power. I mean, there was no one in the world more powerful than Solomon when he lived. And yet the most powerful people in the ancient world were the pharaohs. Where are they? And wealth, it fades, it changes. Our heirs get it and usually squander it because they don't, how many times do we see an heir of a great fortune squander it because they just got it by virtue of being alive and being born into the family they were born into? You work hard, you invest money, you build up a fortune, and then a bunch of knuckleheads come and drive the price of GameStop up and you lose everything. I mean, so all of these things that he tries, what he finds is they fade, they disappear. Ultimately, they're meaningless. And you go through that list of things we talked about. We just said wisdom, self-indulgence, power, wealth. We try those today. And we find the same thing. Okay. It fades. It goes away. And the world and the universe, it keeps on spinning. And if all we're about is building up earthly power, earthly wisdom, earthly pleasure, earthly wealth, what we're going to find is it's not going to do us any good in the long run. It's going to fade. It's going to go away. It's impermanent.
Yeah. Kind of reflecting on this, you're making me think that I'm trying to get inside the the head of Solomon. Why does he lead this way? What was it about his life that was taking him there? We can think about the person who asks for everything that what do you get for the person who has everything, right? Well, one good answer is nothing. At this point, Solomon has reached the top of power, has reached the top of wisdom. We know from other parts of Scripture that people come to him, and there doesn't seem to be a quality of let me go out to someone else and seek wisdom and have someone to have conversation with. And so Solomon is realizing it's lonely at the top, and now he sees the emptiness in that, and he's wondering if there is any type of permanence. And I think those first 11 verses outline that well. That if the earth is the greatest thing that man can see, and yet, and he goes through each of the different parts of the earth. The earth as you said, the earth goes in cycles, but I hate to tell it to Solomon, but even the earth is not permanent. Even the mightiest things, and certainly anything that is lesser, anything that is creation, is going to be impermanent. And so our reaction to that, our reaction to our own mortality, when it finally hits us, you talk about the teenagers finally realizing that I'm not immortal. Like there are consequences to my actions, and then trying to find purpose there. It's very well laid out and leads us, I think, well into asking the individual questions, and looking at different pieces that we might think he would find more value in because it was so important to his character. So, Jeremy, lead us through the next section there.
Well, you look at what Solomon's doing. Our world is a lot the same way. Okay. We seek our own fulfillment in a lot of ways. The phrase, if it feels good, do it. You do you. I hate that phrase. I hate the phrase you do you because that's part of the problem. Adam and Eve, they did them and look what happened. I mean, that's part of the problem. Okay. The phrase find your own truth. I mean, what? And you look at all these things we use as truth. The problem with it is our truth fades with us. There's always a new fad. There's always a new cool toy. There's always a new cool thing. You know, you think about wisdom. You know, the deeper we delve into the mysteries of the universe, and this isn't just as you grow and as you learn, you realize how much you don't know. It's literally as science delves deeper into the physical universe, the more science realizes that the old laws don't work. You know, we went from Newtonian physics to Einsteinian relativity to quantum mechanics. And the answer to quantum mechanics is less an equation than I mean, you know, and that's drastically oversimplifying it. I get it. And now we're on to string theory, which I won't even begin to attempt to parse that, okay? Except to say it gets really weird. Okay. And so, and you know, when okay, my field that I've studied, history, we're constantly going back and looking at the information, and I hesitate to say reinterpreting because it sounds like we're reinventing the story, but we're approaching history from different perspectives.
Didn't we reach the end of history in like 1990?
Well, okay, yeah. People said that, and yet here we are. I mean, that's a great example. Okay, think about it. For 4 decades, the Cold War dominated American political life. Okay, and you know, and I'm just barely old enough to remember some of that. I was a small child, but I remember the Berlin Wall. Okay, I don't remember it being built, but I do remember the Berlin. Don't I know? Don't. Okay, and then the wall came. That wall that seemed so permanent from 1961 to 1989 came down. And came down because an East German minister was not adequately briefed, okay, and said the wrong thing in a press conference, and here we go. All right. 2 years later, the Soviet Union, which, you know, it's funny, in the movie Star Trek 4, which is one of the good ones, it's an even number, so it's good. There's a crisis on Earth. It's the one where they go back in time and get the whales.
Sorry, I was getting Trek and Wars mixed up. Sorry.
Don't do that. So anyway, there's this crisis on Earth, and they're calling out stations. And Star Trek 4 is set in like the 2200s. Okay, it was released in 1986, but it's set in like the 2200s. And they get a report. They say, we're getting a report from the station in Leningrad, which is not even the name of the city anymore. It went back to St. Petersburg like 5 years after that movie came out. Okay. So the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, all of that, we thought this is the way it's going to be. And look what happened.
Yeah.
It ended. See? And so, you know, we did, and ironically, it wasn't the end of history, it was resetting history. If you look at history, a multipolar world with lots of different countries kind of playing off of each other, that's more what you find in history. So it was a resetting of history. And here we go again. Okay. You know, wealth is transient. You build up wealth, and then comes 1929, or the stock market crash in 1987, the housing crunch in 2008, GameStop. Okay, the whole GameStop mess that's going on right now.
We're so current with our references.
Yeah, exactly. We want to get all the way current. You know, when I teach government class, I tell my students, be careful anytime someone talks about a permanent governing majority in our political system. Within 2 cycles, that majority is going to change. I mean, that's what's going to happen. Okay. Power fades. Wisdom can only know so much. Even the religion that some people practice, and Solomon, he does try religion, but he tries a religion that's based on him and what he wants. Okay. And you look at the way the world practices religion. We either practice kind of a religion where we seek God through rituals, and as long as we're checking our boxes and doing our rituals, we're good. Well, the rituals become drained of meaning and value. Or we seek religion as entertainment. We turn our church services into concerts and things like that. And what we discover is, okay, next time you have to play 2 extra verses of the song or sing 2 extra verses because you're not getting that high that you got last time. See? So all of these things that Solomon tries, we try them too. And what we find is they're meaningless. Okay, you seek notoriety. It's interesting. One of the most controversial eras in Major League Baseball history was the steroid era. Okay, what was going on there? What was going on there is you had baseball players who were seeking notoriety. And
Chicks dig the long ball.
Yeah, chicks dig the long ball. Exactly. But you look at it, you go back, there's a Sports Illustrated cover from 1998, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire. They've got the epic home run chase, and they're on the cover of Sports Illustrated dressed as Greek gods. And there was an even better hitter out in San Francisco who said, how come they're getting all the press? And so 5 years later, he hit 73. Yeah. None of them are in the Hall of Fame. None of them. See, because they tried to take that shortcut. They were seeking meaning, seeking notoriety, seeking to be known throughout time. And it doesn't always collapse like that. But oftentimes it's interesting, when you study history, oftentimes what you will find is people that seek to create their own meaning, that seek to create their own value, it'll fall apart. I had a student today ask me, who are my favorite presidents? And I wanted, and I couldn't just simply answer the question. I had to go into a big long spiel about why I think ranking presidents is silly and all that. But what I came down to is, the presidents that really, they served in crisis and they really made a difference. Guys like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. What set them apart? What set Washington apart was his incredible humility and the fact that, yes, he did have his reputation in mind. He did want to be known as a good, humble servant, but he wanted to be known as a humble servant. See, and his goal was, what can I give for the cause? Abraham Lincoln, same thing. Abraham Lincoln was, I'm going to preserve the Union, and then later we're going to end slavery. Mm-hmm. That was the cause. It was beyond him. It was above him. It was apart from him. Okay. And he saw himself not as, I'm going to be a great historical monument. They're going to build a big memorial to me in Washington, D.C. They're going to write, a 20-foot tall stack of books, literally 20-foot tall. You can see them in the gift shop across the street from Ford's Theater. They've got every book ever written about Lincoln in a big stack. It's 20 feet tall. It's huge. That's not what he was thinking about. He was thinking about something beyond himself. Okay. And those are the ones that we really remember in history and we really hold up. And what you find is they weren't perfect. They had feet of clay. All human beings do. But their reputation tends to stand the test of time really well.
Yeah. I want to hit on one thing you said before we go on to closing comments, and the closing of the book specifically.
Yeah.
The idea of the emptiness of religion, I think, is important, specifically for the group of us who are part of this conversation, right? So I think that we should be wary of that, and it's not just other people in their empty religion; it's us in our empty religion. Even when you are technically getting all the things right, when you don't, when your heart is not there, when there is no relationship with God, we tend to have a very self-centered view of religion. That the purpose of religion is for me to, we wouldn't say this, but it's the way we act. It's for me to make God love me, or to make God bless me, to make God save me from my sins. Yes, God, I realize I've sinned, but I've done all the things that you told me to do. So therefore, you have to enter into relationship with me. The very nicest way I can put it is, I feel bad for those people, and I feel bad for myself because I do this myself too. But that's the worst kind of religion, right? It's the worst way to try to find meaning in life. To put forward this idea that we are at the center of the problem of the world, that we are at the center of what needs to be solved. And if I only get myself right, then the rest of the world will work itself out. I understand those that say, make your own bed when you get up in the morning, that you have to solve your own problems first before you're able to move out into the rest of the world. Even Jesus says, take the log out of your own eye before you worry about someone else's speck. That said, if we go into our lives thinking that our ability to solve problems, our ability to be good in the world is worth a hill of beans, we've missed the point. We don't see that the overarching narrative of the story, the overarching point of what's going on in all of reality and all of the world, is that God is in control. God is at the center. God is the one that is worthy of praise, that is worthy of us giving him all of the glory. And as obvious and simple as that is, I miss it every day, too often. There are some days that are worse than others, obviously, but to put all of these other things at the forefront of our lives is too common, I would say. That's obvious, but it's something to remind ourselves about. So, Jeremy, let's close this out. I'm depressed. I'm not sure. Not sure what we're doing here. How do we end this? How does Solomon, how does the teacher end Ecclesiastes?
Well, probably the most quoted verse, unless you're singing a song from the 1970s, from the book of Ecclesiastes is 12:13. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And I think Solomon is hitting here on the point that he missed in his experimentation. If we live life under the sun, it is fleeting, it is meaningless. Okay. But let's take it above the sun. See, God gave us the ability to feel good things. He created good things for us to experience. When we experience those things the way God intended, they bring true value and true meaning. God's material blessing. God has, you look at it, we say it so often it's become a cliche, but we really are the most blessed generation in the history of the world. What are we doing with that? See, when we take that material blessing and we use it for God's kingdom, okay, one, we are working in our and from our eternal blessing, and we are working to share that eternal blessing with others. Okay, God's wisdom points to knowledge of God and is purposeful. See, God, when we view the world through the lens of God and let wisdom lead us to God, okay, we will find the whole duty of man, which is to fear God and keep his commandments, to respect God, to love God. Ultimately, God gives meaning, because here's the thing about this world, Michael, like you said earlier, everything that's created will end. Okay. The world will end. The world is not permanent. Okay. So what is something that won't end? God. Someone, I guess. God won't end. God is eternal. And so when we fill all of these things that we do with God, then it fills it with meaning. God provides that solidity, that mist, that vapor that Solomon was talking about in chapter 1 does not have. God provides the things we do with meaning and value. I mentioned the people in history like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, people like that who stand the test of time are people that were devoted to a cause that was higher than themselves. Okay, they emptied themselves for a cause. They didn't take on a cause to build fame for themselves. They emptied themselves for a cause. Well, when we empty ourselves for the cause of Christ, we are taking on a meaning that is so much more than what we have, and it gives all of these things that we go through in this life, both the good and the bad. It gives them value. It gives them meaning. Okay. It fills them up, if you will. And so, what is the purpose? Why are we here? Well, we've said it before. Imago Dei, image of God. Okay. We need to make sure we don't turn that into a cliche. But at the same time, we need to be constantly reminding ourselves of that fact. Okay. That these things have value because they are gifts of God. And when we treat them like that and use them for his service, then they become so much more full, so much more meaningful.
Very well said. I'm just going to repeat what you said, but I'm just going to just wanted to focus on verse 13, the common phrase that we hear so often, and rightfully so: fear God and keep his commandments. When I read that, I see that fearing God is an acknowledgement. It is just stating reality. You know, we when there is an all-powerful being in front of you, you're in fear. So acknowledge reality, and then keep his commandments. So there is a natural reaction to that. I feel both. It's telling us to fear and to keep, but both of those are just outpourings of who God is. That God's being flows into who we are. He transforms our lives, and it results in holy fear. It results in a desire and a love to keep commandments, to follow after him, and to let him change our lives. So if we are looking for meaning, we look no further than the one that can change our meaning for us. So I enjoyed this. It got a little better at the end, a little less depressing, but of course that's Ecclesiastes for us. Solomon was asking questions that if we haven't asked them, we will. We'll hear others ask them, people we love and people we're just coming into contact with. So it's good for us to review some of the things that Solomon wrote and where he concluded. We appreciate all of you being with us for this conversation. We enjoy having us all here and being able to do this. Of course, we look forward to being able to do this in person, Sunday morning Bible classes. We want them to be back soon. But until then, we'll continue to be here. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next week.